We're going into the think tank, and usually in the think tank we talk about a policy that we would like to see come to fruition. But this week I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to talk about a policy that is already on the books, but it's not being used right now. I have to give credit to Thom Hartmann, and he wrote a great article about this that I want to talk to you guys. And it's about the corporate death penalty. All right, so the process of revoking corporate charters goes back to the very first years of the United States corporation. And they're chartered by the state, not the federal government, to serve public interest. So that means this change can happen at the state level. When a corporation does business ethically and legally, it serves its local community, its employees, its customers, and its shareholders. But beginning in 1784, Pennsylvania demanded the corporations include a revocation clause in corporate charters that automatically dissolved them after a few decades, so they couldn't grow so large or so rich as to become a public menace. Now think about that, guys. Imagine corporations who have been in this Amazon right there, basically being in service for so long that they get so big that they become problematic. I mean, we're definitely seeing that today. As the United States grew, the federal government passed laws requiring corporate death penalty revocation clauses in the state's corporation charters of insurance companies in 1809, banks in 1814. By the late 1880s, every state required them for all business corporations. Presidents have even run for public office and won on platforms including the revocation of corporate charters. One of the largest issues of the election of 1832 was Andrew Jackson demand that the corporate charter of the Second Bank of the United States not be renewed. That's a whole case study in itself. Banks, oil corporations, match manufacturers, whiskey trusts, and sugar corporations all received the corporate death penalty in the late 1800s. So here's some pushback from the oligarchs in response to this. John D. Rockefeller and his oligarchic buddies publicly called for states to change their corporate governance laws. In New Jersey, they heard the call and thus became the first state to engage in what was then called charter mongering, changing its corporate charter rules to satisfy the desire of nation's largest businesses. In 1885, its legislature abolished maximum corporatized limits, as New Jersey and then Delaware threw out all restrictions on corporate behavior, allowing corporations to have interlocking boards, to live forever, to define themselves for any legal purpose, to own stock in other corporations, and so on. Corporations began to move both their corporate charters and in some cases their headquarters to charter mongering states. So to me right now, I hear about this back then and I think it's just normal, commonplace, everyday policy for boards to have different corporation boards. You hear about Elon Musk being on, let's say, for example, Amazon, or Jeff Bezos on the board of Netflix. Like, this is every day for us that we hear stuff like that. Today, every state still has laws that allow it to impose the corporate death penalty. It's just decades since they've been used against a large corporation. New, smaller, more innovative companies can fill the spaces now accompanied by bloated corporate criminals. The result will be as it was after at&t was broken up in the 1970s for violating anti-monopoly laws. That was done by the Jimmy Carter administration. And explosions of innovation, competition, and opportunity happened after they broke up at&t. I got more to say about that, but I'm going to throw it to you guys. Tell me what you thought about that.
I mean, I'm surprised those laws are still in the books, actually.
Yeah, but there's a lot of laws on the books that we just completely ignore. Really, really old, ridiculous laws that nobody pays attention to anymore. So this is probably very similar. But I mean, part of what you were reading kind of reminds me of term limits in a sense, right? Corporate charters only existing for limits of 20 years, let's say. And they have to be renewed every so often.
Yeah.
We as progressives fight for term limits in Congress and in politics in general. Maybe it's time we start holding corporations to these same types of restrictions.
Yeah. And one thing I want to point out, look what John D. Rockefeller did. It sounds so much like, who's the richest guy in America right now?
Bezos.
Jeff Bezos, right? What did he do? A couple years ago, he said, hey, I want to do HQ2. How about you guys? Which state should I go to? You know, and they had a game show of which state can have the most tax breaks given to Amazon so that he can bring his beloved HQ2 to their place. You see, AOC had to deal with that in New York, where he wanted to come to New York, but luckily they were able to fight back. And actually what happened was Amazon didn't even want to negotiate. That's where it broke down. The people who were against it, but they said, hey, you know what, let's come to the table, let's negotiate, and let's see what we can do. Let's have a fair system here. And Jeff Bezos was like, I value my helipad that I could get for you guys to pay for more than me coming and bringing these jobs.
Yeah, but they ended up creating more jobs in New York regardless, because they know they wanted to go there anyway. So
exactly.
they didn't want to negotiate. Well, too bad, so sad.
And they ended up in New York anyway. They ended up buying, yeah. The other thing
to the state of Virginia, you know, and the thing is that like people, a lot of it is just that the way they write those things, right? They talk about, 25,000 jobs. You know, what they do is they say, 10 years. But what happens if they don't meet that in 10 years?
Yeah.
And what they do is they just relocate people. They'll be like, not 25,000 new jobs. So there's a lot of stuff that the way they sell it, people don't know about it. We don't do the research and stuff. But, you know, to your point, I think, you know, the best way to bring it back is how do we take money out of politics, you know, get all these billionaires out of the politician politics. And I think it's definitely will be a way to bring it back.
Totally.
Well, and what one angle of this I don't think we've talked too much about yet is on the punishment aspect. So when companies are bad, we want to make sure that they are held to that standard and punished appropriately. And in the case of the most severe punishments, it could be this death penalty. So not just waiting after 20 years and giving them the death penalty because they've grown so large, but in the case that they're actively harming, then in those cases also look at maybe it's not a death penalty, but maybe it's a jail. If you do something terrible, then you can't function for 5 years or 10 years. And see how that goes. It's funny how politicians want corporations to be classified as people when it comes to free speech and when it comes to political donations, but they don't want them to be classified as people when it comes to things like punishments. Because if I go and I kill somebody, I will be in jail and maybe receive the death penalty. If companies kill people through their actions, they might get a fine, but they aren't put in jail. They aren't dissolved. Yeah. So I think that's something that we need to highlight with this, where, if you want to treat them like people, then treat them like people. And
there you go.
That's one of my pet peeves, man, with companies, and it's the punishment factor, because, maybe not as severe as jail, but let's just say I just robbed $200 from the grocery store. I get more time than an executive embezzling 10 million or 10 billion even. That the punishment has to fit the crime, because we've seen that when it comes to corporations, whenever they do something heinous, drastic, I mean, I think we had who was it? Was it HSBC that was smuggling like cartel money?
Yeah, laundering money laundering.
But the thing that irks me is that whatever fine they get is less than whatever profit they made from doing whatever they were doing. So it's like, all right, I'm gonna make 10 billion and I'm gonna have to pay 20 million in fines. That's the cost of doing business. I'll do it 20 times. I'll do it again and again.
Yeah, exactly.
And the punishment is gonna be for me as CEO. It's like, maybe I lose my job, but I'm gonna get a $50 million payday. So it's like
golden parachute.
You know what? I already made my money.
Yeah,
I make 10 billion. I take my 50 million, and then 2 years later, I'll be the CEO of the other bank.
Exactly.
A good example of that is the telecommunications, or the TCPA, the Telecommunications Privacy Act. So when that came out, the cost of violating it was so high. It's like $5,000 per instance. So they send you a robocall or something like that. It's massive fines, and companies all adjusted appropriately. Wow. But on the flip side, I've heard conversations with people where they go, the fine is this. I've heard those conversations. Well, we're not going to make that change because the fine is so low that it's cheaper for us to keep it going. So you have to do what the TCPA and other punitive laws have done to really inspire people, to inspire companies to do that. And also, when you look at the Affordable Care Act, a big part of it, what people said was that the fine for not going on the insurance wasn't enough, and in many cases was cheaper than the plans themselves. So because of that, a lot of people, the healthy people, just opted not to take the plan and pay the fine because it was cheaper. So if you were going to put some kind of fine in the Affordable Care Act, it should have been more than the cost of the lowest tier Affordable Care Plan.
Yeah, so my last great point there, Gabe. My last point to button this conversation is, so we saw how New Jersey was the first to hear the call of John D. Rockefeller. Then next was Delaware, right? And then I didn't want to go into it too much, but the article talked about how even New Jersey, under Woodrow Wilson, he was the governor at the time, kind of pulled back a little bit on what he did, but Delaware kept on with it. And matter of fact, they continue going down that path to the point to this day. Delaware is the most corporate friendly state in America. Where are all the credit card companies incorporated? In Delaware. Guess which was a previous senator of Delaware? The future Joe Biden. Well, he's currently the nominee for the Democratic Party, and we'll see if he will become the president. But that guy who was very friendly with the banks. So
nothing is going to fundamentally change.
I want to jump in with one final point. One final point is another set of companies that needs the death penalty is any company that gets corporate subsidies that shouldn't be getting them. Failed companies, failed business models that are only being propped up, like the oil industry, by corporate subsidies, like the corn industry, where you have so many things going into, so much stuff going into. So if you can't run your company without excessive corporate subsidies, in some cases anti-competitive subsidies, then you probably deserve that penalty. So,
and I understand when a technology is brand new, but it's in the good of the services and the good of the people, I can understand subsidizing it. So like solar panels when it was first in its infancy, but not, we got oil companies who not only are they archaic now, they are also, we've seen documents come out that they knew about climate change way like 30, 40, years ago. So they definitely need their charter taken away. All right, guys, let me know in the comments if you have any stories of any companies that you would love to see broken up, any companies that you would love to see get the death penalty or the corporate death penalty, and any stories. We'd love to hear from you below.